We've now got a auth reducer put together, and we need to make sure that we get that auth piece of state back into our Google Auth component. Now remember, this is the part of this refactor or introducing Redux that gets to be a little bit kind of awkward or confusing. We already had our Google Auth component wired up to have component level state inside of it. And so the component itself knew whether or not the user was signed in. So we've now essentially extracted that information to our Redux store. And so now we need to pipe that information back into the component that was already containing that data. And so I know it feels a little bit awkward to do this, but this is the correct way to do it. So I'm going to open up my components directory and find the Google Auth file. Then inside of here, we're going to go down to the very bottom and add in a map state to props function. So right above my export default statement, I'll put in const map state to props. So that will be called with my state object. And then inside of here, I'm going to return an object with a property is signed in. That's going to have state.auth.is signed in, like so. So now the value of is signed in is going to be either null, true, or false, just as the state value of is signed in inside of here had a value of before. So now we're going to go through this component and do a pretty good refactor to update a couple different things inside of here and make sure that we're not making use of component level state anymore. So first off, inside of my class at the very top, I'm going to remove the state initialization, like so. Next up, inside the .then statement right here, we need to make sure that we dispatch some initial action when we finish initializing our library to indicate whether or not the user is actually signed in. Right now we are immediately calling setState, so essentially we want to call either sign in or sign out depending upon whether or not the user is signed in. Now to do so, we could either write out some if statement like this right here inside that .then. But another way that we could write this to reuse a little bit of code is to just call onAuthChange directly with whether or not the user is signed in. So we can call onAuthChange, we'll pass in whether or not the user is signed in, and then this function is going to call the appropriate action creator. Remember, this is all code that is going to be running at initialization, so right when this library first boots up. All right, so I'm going to remove this.setState, and I'm going to instead call this.onAuthChange, and I'm going to pass in the user's current authentication status. So I'll say this.auth.is.signed-in.get, like so. So now when we finish initializing our library, we're going to assign the auth instance to this.auth. We'll then immediately update our auth state inside of our Redux store, and then we will basically sit around and wait for that authentication status to change at some point in the future. All right, cool. So I think there's probably just one other thing we have to change. So down inside of render auth button, we are currently looking at state is signed in. So we no longer have a state object inside of here. So rather than referencing state, we're just going to update that to props because that is where the is signed in property is now going to be coming from. So I'll update it inside the if statement. I'll update it in the else if right here. So this.props.is signed in. And I think that's about it inside this file. I'm going to do one quick search in here. I'll search for state and make sure I don't have any other references to state besides inside the map state to props function. Okay, I think I'm good to go. So I'm going to save this and we'll flip on over to our browser and do a test. All right, so I want you to know that as you go through this test right here, it is entirely possible that we might have made a typo or a mistake at some point. So if you see any error message, I would highly encourage you to take a look at the error message you got and try to figure out exactly, what is going wrong here. Now, I'm already getting a warning message right here, a classic mistake that I personally make all the time. I define map state to props at the bottom of the file, and I never actually passed it into connect, so I'll make sure that I do that right now, like so. Okay, so now I'm going to flip back over, and now I should be able to click on the sign in button. I'll see the pop-up appear, that's good. I'll select an account, and then I see the button flip back over to sign out. Now I can refresh the page. I still see it say sign out. And when it doesn't say sign out, when the page is first initializing, I don't see any button there at all, which is definitely good. So now I should be able to click on sign out, and it's going to go back to sign in with Google. Now I should be able to refresh again and still see sign in with Google. All right, that's it. It looks perfect to me. So again, if you saw anything that did not quite go correct here, that's totally fine. first off, check to see if you have any error messages. The other thing that might be going wrong is something that we're going to talk about in the next video. So if it feels like you are clicking that button, but nothing is actually happening, then watch the next video because we're going to go over a little refactor to our reducer that might fix an issue that you have. So quick pause, and we'll take a look at some little refactor that we're going to do in the next video.